Hello and welcome to another Sunday Superversive live stream. I'm your host, Ben Wheeler. I gave Anthony the night off, and I am here with my brother from a holy mother, Brian Niemeier. How are you doing today, Brian?
Well, thanks for having me.
Always a pleasure to bring you on. Today we are talking about somebody else's favorite subject, as I've been advertising this, the baby boomers. The baby boomers are, many people describe them as the locusts we must inherit the earth after, and many other lovely sobriettes aside. Um, why don't you give us a few words to start us off?
Sure. Yeah, we do. What you said is accurate. We're not really at the point where anyone who's really dialed in knows the score, and early complaining about it is, I don't know, kind of 2018 at this point. So yeah, what members of generations Jones, X, Y, the millennials, and the Zoomers should turn their energies and attentions toward is thinking about, well, what does the post boomer future look like? How are we going to interact with and navigate this new post boomer, really post America as we knew it world?
Yep. And there's a whole bunch of changes that are going to happen from Christianity to economics. Not that Christianity itself will change, but the how America views Christianity, economics, law. I imagine that lawyers are absolutely going to be obese after the last baby boomer dies off, um, and a whole host of other subjects. Uh, not to mention the very governance of the country itself. Uh, as is with Superversive tradition, our main focus is not necessarily politics, even though we do talk about it. Our focus is, of course, the kingdom of heaven, Christ, God Almighty, the Holy Spirit. So we'll start with talking about how the boomers interact with Christianity, and I've got a few infographics and ideas that we can talk about, uh, including this one, which has always struck me um, because of how I grew up as a Protestant. Christianity is a relationship, not a religion. And then the kid says, the Zoomer, based, says that is a false understanding of the gospel which trivializes the law, which represents God's perfect holiness and our inability to fulfill it, and trivializes the complete and perfect atoning work of Jesus Christ. Do not indoctrinate into your cult of complacency, old man. And complacency it is.
Well, and complacency is death, as is the wages of all sin, and yeah, that sums up the death cult. It also overlooks what religion is, which is a virtue. Um, in the Thomistic tradition, it's a virtue. It's a sub virtue of justice. It's rendering to God what is His due, as the sovereign creator of all and the source of all good. So that's a false dichotomy.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Even though the I don't know how it is with the Catholics, but with Protestants, due to the Jesus freak movement and a few other things, which I'm going to touch on, but honestly deserve their own just me sitting down and explaining all of it for 2 hours, 3 hours. The religion, the replacement of religion with relationship is incredibly rife, and it's probably the source of the weakening of a lot of formerly very steadfast churches. The chart I brought up here is a chart basically that says, do you believe in God? You know, would you share, like, it's a whole bunch of different questions that show how willing you are you to proselytize and show your faith. Um, the biggest surprise here for me is the Gen X line is going up, and I think that bodes well for the future that we cannot yet foresee. But as you can see here, the silence more or less declined, but I think that might be more of a subject of death and or, you know, the culture declining more than the faith of them, even though the Silents do share a bit of the villainy of their progeny. The baby boomers are steady, Gen X going up, millennials going down, and Gen Z plummeting down. Now, mind, I don't think that these numbers are as, not that they're precise numbers, but these numbers aren't as severe as all that. For one, the Gen Z meme sphere, the new sphere upon which ideas flow through the internet, to use sci fi terms, has turned towards Christianity in a hard way, has the millennial sphere. What's more is that this chart is documenting more or less Gen Z's falling away from the church, which is a phenomenon I saw myself, and it caused me no small amount of distress. You know, when you're forced to go to church, you don't necessarily believe in what the church says.
Oh yeah, survey after survey tracks that. Like, and I'm sure you've seen when they ask overall self-identified Christians if they believe with certain tenets of Christian doctrine and morality, like, oh, well, should abortion be legal? Are divorce and remarriage okay? Etc. Well, one thing that the media always touts is, well, see, Christians agree with us. You got like 70% of Christians agreeing with like the Democrat platform on these issues. But then, if you break it down by weekly church attendance, it totally reverses.
Yep.
So there's a data point in your favor. Also, recently I did a post along similar lines, and I looked up data like this. I'm going to try to find it. But yeah, among...
I found one of your, this is the chart. No, that's divorces.
Yeah, it's divorces, but there's one about... There's a bar graph about religiosity, about generation, and yeah, the numbers for Gen Z weren't quite as bleak.
Yeah.
Like, I think still about half of them are still religious, but yeah, they are, like, most of the nuns are from them, like the people who believe in none of the above when asked about religion. But even then, that's still not outright. They're not outright atheists, although they do have the most self-identified atheists of any group. But I mean, they're in high school now, so of course they do. I think a lot of that is just because the thing is, also, if one survey I looked at showed that Gen Z are as religious now as the boomers were at their age. And the boomers are the most religious generation right now.
Yep.
Because, yeah, I think that the line with the silence on top, the decline is accounting for deaths. So just by the fact that the boomers are the biggest generation, the millennials are nipping at their heels, but the boomers are still the biggest. The majority of boomers are Christian, and so most Christians are boomers at the moment. There just aren't as many silents.
Right.
And yeah, so there's reason to believe that as they mature, more members of Gen Z will return to the church. I mean, I know in the Catholic sphere, we've got, I believe, like about 50% of Catholics leave the church in their high school and college years, like right around when kids leave the house for the first time.
Yep.
But then about, it breaks down to about half of Catholics leave, but then a lot return. So the number breaks down to like a 40% apostasy rate, which is atrocious, but I would need to look this up. But basically, like, of those who leave, like a majority percentage of the percent who leave do return later.
Yes. In Protestant circles, it's usually connection with the founding of a family.
Yeah.
You know, you
Which
get.
Unfortunately is getting harder and harder to afford.
I know. At this point, I'm just gonna find some mad woman in the woods, and it's just like, listen, you'll do. You're cheaper. But with this stuff, I have great hope for Gen Z. It sounds like you do too.
For
I
about half of them.
for about half of them.
Because I've talked to Zoomers, and the way that Zoomers or our guys describe it is like, look, it's a hard demarcation. So like about half of us are not only total heathens, but downright satanic and just buy into the entire global homo death cult agenda. And then if you're not just like total death cult, then you are a Bible thumping in church every week at least, like Ethot patrolling crusader. Like
Right.
your full day's full. So
Oh yeah.
it's pretty
I
stark.
even the ones who might be more moderate than what we described have been like, the second they see the bit of a real world. Like I one time saw, I was working at my gas station, which thankfully I no longer have to be afflicted with.
Praise God.
Right. But basically, a man with a leather dress. He did nothing I could throw him out for, even though I desired it, despite his atrocious manners. And the Gen Z female basically treated it like it was kind of funny or nothing was wrong with it. But the Gen Z guy, I could tell he had never seen anything like it, and it's like what he was changed into something probably more willing to accept, the depravity of man and the sacrifice of Christ. Um, when I was growing up, basically every child, every kid pastor who wasn't wearing skinny jeans with a venti latte always said, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. Um, but they were boomers. So yeah, this chart is much more grim. I chose it because it had the simple lines. There's
Right.
also, I guess we'll save that for culture. Here's one. Oh wait, uh, there it is. Hey man, Jesus just gave us like one commandment, bro, which is to be vaguely nice to each other. As long as you're being vaguely nice by the cultural standards of the current time period we live in and completely ignore the Bible, you're doing a heckin' wholesome Christianity. Now, that uses the internet lingo, but I've heard it before, and I've heard it many times. Um, oh man, I could hang myself on all those
Mhm.
rainbow scarves that the Lutheran female pastors always wear. Have you seen those? The
Not in person, thankfully.
Yeah, neither have I. Neither have I. I
I
would
think
not.
those would be witches.
Oh
Is
yes,
what that would be.
yes. Oh, it's
Yeah.
it's witchcraft indeed. But they always make a TikTok or a video
Something
about.
goes through my head. Anyway, yeah. By the way, I did find that chart on my hard drive. It basically it's a minority of Gen Z that are outright religiously unaffiliated. It's 38%, which is the same as millennials. So according to this 2016 survey, uh, there hasn't been an increase in lack of religious affiliation between the millennials and Gen Z. So that's kind of holding steady.
Mm,
But where they, like those that are religious, has shifted around to like more wishy-washy, like spiritual but not religious kind of an outlook.
do you mind dropping it in the Twitch DMs and I'll put it up for the crew?
Yeah, let me see if I can do that.
Yep, yep. It's like we're discussing sort of the culture that the boomers are handing to us, but we're not dooming about it. Maybe my joke about all those scarves, I was was a little bit too grim for what I'm intending. Uh, though if you remember the best How the Grinch Saved Christmas
There
version
you
with
go.
Jim Carrey. Oh, thank you.
It's in the Twitter DM. So yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Where he goes, I could hang myself on all these Christmas scarves you throw out. You know, I have always found that incredibly funny because I hate a Christmas scarf. I don't like them. With the spirit of the church as it is, more and more people go for this wishy-washy Christianity than actually stand for anything. And part of that is that we've gone for degeneracy over over honor and truth and living. Did it not say that? Living for what's right, which is there's a quote by Spurgeon where he says, I would prefer, a backwoods preacher full of, I think it was Spurgeon, a backwoods preacher full of fire than five lily-handed Harvard preachers, and that's the sort of thing we need today, because
Yeah, everybody forgets that Harvard was a seminary. Everybody
right.
forgets that. Yeah, it still is, just not of the religion it originally was.
Yeah, it's well, it's like is CERN the High Temple? Um, is it Harvard, or is it, like there's a whole bunch of
Hmm.
different uh, choices we could have for this. I don't know. Of course, I've noticed that uh, a lot of the science types seem to be silence. Like I believe Carl Sagan was a silent generation, wasn't he?
Oh, let me check. I can tell you in a GIF here,
In there.
because the silence would have been those born from like 35 to 45.
Yes.
No, he is just barely great. 34.
Really?
So
Hmm.
he's right on the cusp. He's right on the line.
Right.
Yeah, we'll give it to him.
All
I
right.
would say in Outlook he was definitely more of a silent than a great culturally.
Yep.
'Cause that's what my generational scale measures, is like formative influence and cultural outlook.
Yep. Hmm.
Unless actually the silence might have been like one of the last actual 20-year generations, because the boomers are really one that flips. So I'm going to pull up my chart here. Oh no, okay, yeah, they were 35 to 45. So yeah, the greats were the last generation that actually did span the standard 20 years before the accelerating rate of cultural change shrank it to 10. But it's not an exact science, it's a spectrum.
Yeah, it's not like it's like, I was born in '89, and am I a full Gen Y or am I a millennial? Well, I tend not to fall completely into the nostalgia trap, but at the same time, I don't fully fall into the many flaws of the millennial generation. By the way, I put up the chart there. Um, there's also some good charts going out there that show Christianity, despite the best efforts of the devil, is spreading, especially in
Oh yeah,
China and Asia and all that jazz. You know,
globally the church is really doing better than ever. It's growing in Africa and Asia, and I
hmm
mean that's what we see again and again, is when a people receives the kingdom and then decide they don't want to turn the back on it. God goes, okay, well, I'll take the kingdom away. I'll give it to someone who wants it. I'll take it to someone who will worship me
Yep.
in truth. And that's what's happening.
Yep. And it's just fantastic. I know my church is working with certain East African governments to build churches around the Congo area to help feed
Hmm.
the people and to spread the gospel. They'll stand out in the rain to hear it, like, and my pastor preached in the rain too. But it's just growing. Part of the reason why we both kind of agree. Like I'm never completely sold on Generation Jones. I agree with you. There are signs there. I can't get in there 100%. But with the Boomer generation, one of the things that they received is the mega church, which I consider probably much the same way you might consider I don't know, I can't Vatican II, in that it whatever reforms and good it brought, especially to with the megachurches to American Christianity, it tended to sort of concentrate the bad. Um, I understand that there are several Jesuit saints who were true godly men, uh, but at the same time, I'm sorry, brother, but I can't trust a Jesuit. Um, when I hear something that the news media proclaims.
Yeah, well, they're in need of renewal. The Franciscans are really where I'd recommend looking, and
Really?
I'm a graduate of a Franciscan university, but yeah, and even they admit, yeah, our order really needs renewal because they got the one like cue ball priest guy who goes around to like the gay pride and the pro-abortion marches in his habit, right, carrying rainbow signs and stuff. So they're in a bit down to the Jesuits, but yeah, it's with the mega churches and the spirit of Vatican II stuff. It's all motivated by the same bad spirit, right? The same
Hmm.
cultural sickness. Because all right, I'm one of the few people who's probably you'll probably talk to who has read every Vatican II document. I read all of the conciliar documents.
Wow.
Yeah, I had to for my degree, and the conclusion I've come away with again and again is, well, okay, to say this up front, is it possible within the framework of Catholic theology that Vatican II taught error? Yes, it that is possible. Not every document, and I think possibly no documents. There's an argument that can be made that none of them are protected by the guarantee of infallibility.
Mm.
Like there are no dogmatic definitions in it.
Right.
So it's possible that the Council Fathers just taught errors that conflict with the prior perennial and consistent teaching of the magisterium.
And not
I
even.
don't think that.
Sorry, keep going.
Sorry, a question.
I said not even I would attack Vatican II on the belief that Vatican II was inerrant.
Yeah.
I understand completely what you're talking about.
Okay, good. Just making sure our listeners do. But I don't think it did. However, uh, the language was woefully vague and open to misinterpretation, which is something we've seen way too much of, especially in this current pontificate. Just this church speak
Hmm.
that's really turgid and nebulous. It sounds like it reads like uh, a purple prose laden Hallmark greeting card, right? And then getting like dovetailing with what you said about the mega churches, the people like in Europe and stateside who were then in charge of implementing the council's teachings took full advantage of that and used it to twist the results of the council to their nefarious purposes. So here's a perfect example. Okay, so in Dei Verbum, which was a Vatican II document on sacred scripture, even I grew up, even going to Catholic grade school and high school, I would hear from my boomer religion teachers like, "Oh, well, it's easy to reconcile scripture with science or with history because sure the Bible's inerrant, but that inerrancy only applies to statements on faith and morals. Vatican II said so. See, it's right here because Dei Verbum is printed in the front matter of every Catholic edition of the New American Bible, and in the English translation, it says that trying not to do violence to even the English translation, but it's real weaselly because it's like for the purpose of like teaching or informing forming the faith of the faithful, all biblical statements on faith and morals must be held to be fully inerrant. Well, that's not what the original Latin says. The original Latin says that all positive statements of sacred scripture for the sake of faith and morals must be held to be inerrant. So the Latin is just universal, affirming the church has always taught that every affirmative statement in Scripture is without error. And the Latin is giving the reason. God preserved the Bible from error so that it might be a salutary means of teaching faith and morals. Right? It's not a restrictive phrase, but the English translation done after the fact of Dei Verbum restricts the inerrancy and infallibility of the Bible just to like religious statements, basically, and that's radical.
Right.
That's just wrong. Yeah, that contradicts the perennial teaching of the magisterium from plenty of other documents anyone could look up. So that's just one example of what happened. Multiply that over like every other area. Like really quick, one last example: the Latin Mass, of which much is made. Vatican II just allowed for Mass to be prayed in the vernacular, but again, the folks implemented the council said, "Oh, well, what is allowed is now mandatory," and so Mass allowed almost disappeared, except where you've got like trad bishops and priests, and that was definitely not the council fathers' intention.
Right.
There you
go. I know. So we'll segue into culture with that. I know from our experience, with Protestants, every church is kind of its island. Sure, there are archipelagos. My pastor was recently reelected into an executive board of the IFCA, which is a sort of smaller SBC and unaffiliated. Whew, unaffiliated. But essentially, he's a good man in a position where he can keep out bad doctrine, which other organizations just haven't experienced. A lot of the mega churches that started, with fire and brimstone, full of goods and the Holy Spirit, became touchstones of American culture. During a time which I'm still doing research, I'm looking into church histories and stuff like that, and where there was a great spiritual decline in America, where people sought anything and anyone. Francis Schaeffer would say, their God was personal peace and happiness. But I believe the hunger for a literal deity or a spiritual experience was still there, even overwhelming. Personal peace and affluence, not happiness. Overwhelming the desire for affluence, especially with some of my research into Osho and some of the gurus that came by from India. The mega churches became locuses of sort of churchianity. The Jesus Freak movement came from there. A lot of the California churches rose and fall as megachurches, as one might see a boomtown of the California Gold Rush, funnily enough. And you'd see these people get into this movement like the Jesus Freak movement, which took 20 years to reach the Midwest, where you would have, like, what would Jesus do? Faith. The guy was a drug dealer who turned to Christ. Praise the Lord. But
Amen.
the things that he brought, also lowered the expectations of what could be taught to the children. We had VeggieTales, which was very good, but then we also had these emotional, sad guitar licks, along with, wow, doesn't Jesus love you so much? And I believe that combined with the culture of America, and we're talking America-centric here. It is July 4th. Happy July 4th and happy Independence Day, everyone, now that we've got a good bit of people in. Do check out down in the links below. Brian Niemeier has his new collection of short stories, which I'm eagerly awaiting my physical copy of. And because delivering on those Indiegokos is as well as don't give money to people who hate you, which is ever relevant in this day and age. If only the boomers learned it.
That's a tough nut to crack.
So with these cultural locuses, instead of people being able to take the Satanic Panic seriously, which was validated as I've read your blog posts about, as they couldn't take McCarthy seriously, even though they rose at the same time. They couldn't take the lessons that they were literally glued to their TV screens watching every day. A lot of false prophets, false pastors, and just profiteers like Creflo Dollar crept into the church. You know, Peter Popoff famously would have his wife pick out people from the crowd, learn their backstories, and feed it to him with a wire. Um, you know, the the culture became not Christian, but culturally Christian, and I blame the boomers most of all for a lot of this. They sort of flock to it as a generation. You know, the boomers I know who are true and faithful don't go to mega churches. They actually go to small churches that are actually the backbone of Christianity, and especially Protestant Christianity. If you cannot trust that your local church does not have a good pastor, does not have, people who are true Christians, a cultural touchstone is lost in the fundamental American experience. And if that touchstone is lost, well, something else is going to get lost as well. Maybe you can't trust, whether the roads will stay paved, whether, the education is really worth it. I'm talking to people, and yeah, I want to go to college for animation. And I'm like, well, what are you doing besides? And they're practicing, they're doing this. They might be good at sprite work. I was talking to a young man who happened to be very good at sprite work, but there's no direction with it. Sure, they're young men, but both you and I would agree that our if I'm not speaking too boldly with you, that our gifts are in service to Jesus Christ and God Almighty and His kingdom. We if we were to write something against Christ, that would be a sin using our gifts. And it's if I'm not being too bold with that. Um,
No, not
uh,
at all.
the culture moving forward with the megachurches with Vatican II also coincided with the loss of the popes, or the degrading of the popes. I guess that would be a more accurate term. Um, a slow degrading of music. Even though there was some great music that was made, you know, the the down. You said 1997 for the Cultural Ground Zero, right?
All right, for everything except video games.
Right.
Yeah,
Which was 10 years on in 2007, according to David
right.
Stewart. Um, I think I might invite him on to talk about that sometime, but we'll see.
Good idea.
Um, with uh, with this culture that we're inheriting, the baby boomers guided it throughout that. Whatever the silence did with their Beatles and their gurus and all that jazz, whatever the greatest generation didn't do, the boomers accepted it lock, stock, and barrel. The picture I have up here is a picture of a 1950s guy who is likely greatest generation, reaching out to his boomer children while his wife looks on. Um, it is a picture of Americana. Uh, Speaking from your experience, especially as a Catholic, how would you say the decline went from post Vatican II in the Catholic culture sphere?
Yeah, I can sum that up best with an anecdote. So, a while ago, I was out for a walk in my hometown with a close friend who's a Presbyterian, and we had just left another buddy's house after a weekly role playing game session, and so my other buddy whose house we left, uh, he's also a Catholic. He's a Catholic of Lebanese extraction, which we have a big community here, and so he lives just a couple blocks from our church.
Hmm.
And so we're walking through this neighborhood, and my Presbyterian friend noticed, wow, gee, like this whole neighborhood really seems to be centered around the church. It like radiates out from it. A lot of the houses are in a similar style. Like this is clearly one related housing development. They were built around the same time, post-war, built in the 50s. And whereas, yeah, you could still see, there were a couple of plastic Mary statues in front yards. There were signs for like the local Catholic high school soccer team here and there. But a lot of them had clearly become rentals, or there were immigrants of a different ethnic background that built the neighborhood living there. And you kind of ask, well, am I off base here about this neighborhood's origins and what happened here? And I said, no, and you'll see this played out countless times, not only throughout this town, but across America, where what you would have would be, so you'd have like, in the 1800s, you'd have like the German folks who got done building, they helped build the Illinois-Michigan Canal and then moved downstate away from Chicago. And like they would move into a newly built neighborhood, and they would pool their money, they'd get together, and they'd build a church, and then when the time came to have kids, they'd build a parish school, and then they would bring their kids up in the faith, because they had big families, like 10, 12 kids. Then their kids would bring their kids up in the faith, and again have a big mess of kids, big litter of kids. All send their kids through the parish school, and not all of them would go to college. They'd like take over the family business. Like I know my one buddy's case, his family has had a butcher shop that's remained in the family for generations. It's a local institution. Yeah. I still get my steaks there. They're awesome. But yeah, if you're ever in Peoria, Illinois, go to Allwin's Meat Company. They are so choice. I highly recommend it. But yeah, then right around like the 60s, something changed. Like the families got smaller, and then the kids didn't come back and buy houses close to their childhood homes and close to their parents. They went out of state school sometimes, or if they didn't, then their first job out of school took them out of state, and they stayed gone. They didn't come back. And yeah, as your chart shows, that the boomers tended to stay in the church, or they left to college and came back, but they didn't really raise their kids, because they were the ones who raised their kids with that mindset that, oh, well, it's a relationship, and of course a relationship is your choice whether to have it or not. And we're not going to dictate anything about your relationships, right? Just be safe, use precautions, but we're not going to judge, right? It's that mentality of being your kid's friend instead of the head of the domestic church and a model of God the Father on earth, right?
Right.
And so, yeah, what happened was these former neighborhoods that had been like, you'd have the Polish Catholic neighborhood, Lebanese Catholic neighborhood, the German Catholic neighborhood, the Irish Catholic neighborhood, the Italian Catholic neighborhood. Well, they're just gone now.
Yep.
They're all rental property, and the churches closed and combined and closed and combined, or they don't have a permanent pastor. There's just one pastor who's like the Spanish language outreach, and he just travels around to different parishes throughout the week to offer mass. For like the new wave of Mexican and even Central and South American Catholics who so that brings us to another nefarious aspect of what's been going on, but that boomers also helped to not necessarily usher in but maintain, being the 1965 Immigration Act. But the U.S. bishops, the USCCB, made a great strategic blunder when they saw this 40% apostasy rate and said, well, gee, we could redouble our efforts at catechesis and formation, right? We could actually teach and hand on the faith. But wait, we're boomers. So, well, no, we can't have that. So instead, we're just gonna go shopping. We're gonna go shopping for new congregations, right? We're gonna
Yep.
find people instead of going out and doing missionary work. No, instead of actually doing the Great Commission or trying to bring back the lost sheep that left
Yep.
us, we're just going to import people who are already Catholic. We're going to let other people do the work for us. And okay, you know what? For a while that worked because the first generation, like mom and dad, or grandma and grandpa, yeah, they come into America and they keep the faith. You know, they're in the new like polyglot cosmopolitan congregation that really has nothing in common with each other except for the faith. And not to downplay that, but I'm contrasting it with like at St. Patrick's Church where everybody's Irish, possibly even from the same county. And you had like St. Stanislaus, right? And
Yep.
St. Boniface, et cetera, et cetera.
The the oh yeah, I absolutely understand that. Weirdly though, the Protestants had a separate issue, and it was pretty much the mirror opposite. I know John C. Wright is famous for saying, that the devils, that the heresies usually come in twos. Instead
Right.
of importing many different people, Protestant churches split, and they split up fractally. Like it's an accusation that could be levied against the Protestant church and be accurate, but it became an absolute plague during the primacy of the baby boomers. Um,
Who
I'll
knows how many things became an absolute plague during the period. Anyway, there you
Moses, please just take your people. But we're
go.
begging you. Anyway, so the two stories I have, the first one happened to a church I know of. Essentially, they had a pastor, and I'm not really sure on the original details. Partly because a lot of the people who were there just don't remember it, or they're like, who cares about that, sort of thing. But he became divisive, and he started fighting with people. Now, sure, the first few people who left were firebrands like my father, who especially in his youth was willing to fight anyone over any theological argument that he happened to disagree with. But there were a few things he held sacred, which is the one was included premillennial rapture. I am fairly agnostic on the rapture. I believe it will happen, of course. But there's some things that make me say, okay, I can see your interpretation for the premillennial. I see or post pre-trib. I see post-trib. I stand for pre-trib, But he would actually fight over it, and he actually took away a portion of the church with him who agreed with him. That's fine, That those things happen all the time. Somebody, gets into a fight, they leave, take their family with them. But what he did in the end was quite evil, and it was morally evil. He said, they led them in prayer, there was singing, and then he said, "I'm starting a new church at so and so. Anyone who wants to come with me, join me." And he marched out without even giving a sermon. And he took with him like over no under half the congregation. I consider it, even among Protestants, that was an incredibly extreme reaction. Um, you know, it divided the church, and it caused a wound that people still comment on almost 30 years later.
Is it all
Uh,
right to ask what main issue was his sticking point?
uh, so from what I understand, is that there were some theological fights that made him no friends. But then the
Oh,
big thing was that, like the pre-trib rapture question,
oh,
which is a big thing in Protestant circles. But thankfully, since the Left Behind books have become less popular, it is no longer so big a deal. But essentially, it was bad will, and it was this, and it was that, and it was this, and it was that. And eventually, people just were getting madder and madder, and there was no reconciliation. I've been in church fights before. You know, there's no authority, there's no bishop staff to start whacking people. But the pastor is supposed to remain aloof and neutral to the bickering of his people and instead take care of it. Talk, counsel, hey, I know they run after you, dog, but you got to forgive them. Jesus said, forgive your brother, 70. That wasn't a literal thing, but I'm saying that's what the pastor's service is.
But oh boy, if only the bishops would start whacking people. That'd be great.
Yes, absolutely. Anyway, but he basically divided the church in such a manner, in such a public manner. It wasn't just half your friends don't show up next week and they're down the street in that warehouse. It's I'm walking out with half the congregation in front of everyone, which I consider absolutely evil. Another time, to sort of speak of the health of the Protestant churches, there was a boomer pastor, and he brought in somebody who looked very good on paper, and he could preach a mean thing, but honestly, preaching is just very good rhetoric. And a truly great sermon will be inspired by the Spirit. To be very, very, small view of it, and the church voted in this fellow who looked very good, but by Christmas time, almost nobody could stand him. He gossiped, and he essentially the music guy, who was his partner in crime, dressed up like an elf during a Christmas service. And that was when my family decided it was time to go. We had seen everything. That church also had issues where the pastor kept detailed blackmail files. A previous pastor, like 2, 3 before, the boomer who brought in the guy who looked very good, and had a very nice suit and smelled slightly of sulfur. And he had he had blackmail files of people who would come to him for counseling, and he would say this, 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 this. He was an evil man, but he left the church. He was kicked out rather than divided it up. And of course, this affected culture, and it destroyed a lot of the stability that America had enjoyed. Like, America has had immigration. America has had all kinds of trouble. Like in Missouri here, and tons of Germans were brought over with the Budweisers and the Bushes. With the Bushes, excuse me. Busches. They brought in German farmers because they wanted certain crops that could be grown by Germans. They populated Missouri, and there was already a very large population of them before even that. They marched down Lemay Ferry and took Jefferson Barracks and kept Missouri from siding with the South. Very famously, it was the German immigrants.
Something else they did. So
Hmm?
are you Midwest enough to know what a pork tenderloin sandwich is?
Yeah.
What does a pork tenderloin sandwich consist of to you?
So mustard, fried onions. Let's see here. I don't think we're talking about the same thing at all. Like, thinking about it, like, I've only had it at, like, some restaurant or whatever, but it's like, tell me what the true pork tenderloin sandwich is.
Well, actually, you're talking about the true one, but what we call a pork tenderloin in these parts in Illinois is a cut of pork which is actually like a boneless pork chop. It's not from the tenderloin at all. It's like
Really?
butterflied, pounded, like super tenderized, and then breaded and deep fried, and then served on a bun with like fresh pickle and onion and ketchup and mustard.
That actually sounds pretty good, though.
It's really good. Where that came from, though,
Yes.
is Germans who originally immigrated to Texas. And so, like, in the Northern Panhandle, there's like a big German scene down there. And it's, I believe, schnitzel is where it evolved from. They just used pork instead of like veal, and put them on a bun for extra carbs for some reason. But it works really well.
Nice. I
I
don't
like
know.
both kinds though. I like both kinds of tenderloin. The kind
Yeah.
you're talking about and the kind I talked about. They're great.
Oh yeah. I'm actually considering. I you know, I kind of want one. I just came off an 8-day fast, so I'm like, you know,
Oh
for the for 4th of July. So it's like, ooh, I'm ready for more pork, especially some pork steaks for tomorrow. Oh.
yeah,
Um. So one of, excuse me. So
yeah.
going from the fall of the churches, the division of the churches, the weakening of church rhetoric and dialectic and all this other stuff that even prevents us talking about these issues. If we were here 30 years ago, boomers talking about the problems with the church, we would not be blaming the cultural changes that we were seeing. I would argue that we would actually blame the divisive, oh, you know those X's, you know those Y's, you know how they are. You know, we would not be actually blaming the issue, which might also implicate ourselves. When we are 60-year-old men, we will be able to look back and say, you know, did we serve the Lord this? Did we change the culture for that? And our chosen field is, of course, art, writing. Um,
Yes.
One of the things I noticed, I mentioned earlier about the popes. You know, people blame Campbell for a lot, but also, you know, men like Michael Moorcock and, you know, the young, if he was ever young, George R. Martin,
Yeah.
and all these other guys pushed the culture. Like whatever Campbell's faults were, I have never seen much evidence that he was a sexual pervert, like Heinlein and Clark and
Oh, that's
possibly
refreshing.
Asimov. Uh, you know, I think he was divorced and remarried, but considering divorce rates, which I'll put up a thing for, I'm not,
Oh yeah.
we're not going to talk about it too much, but just for the culture alone, like, you know, the divorce rate going
Yeah.
down, that chart you put up, uh, you know, good news ahead for that. Um,
Yeah. Spoiler alert. Boomers just are the divorce crisis. That's really all them.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
Uh,
It's all them. It started with them, and it's we're nearing the beginning of the end. Now, a lot of people tell me, "So, well, wait, but don't millennials and Ys and Gen Xers get married less?" I'm like, well, it doesn't matter because we're taking it as a percentage of each generation that are married because you can't get divorced if you're not married first.
yep,
So, yeah, the point is that those among Gen X millennials who can't even afford to get married, they tend to stay married.
yep.
Whereas, or what's driving the divorce crisis is boomers being serially monogamous, getting married and divorced again and again and again.
Yep, and it's like one of the things I'm gonna when I get married, you know, it's one of those things, you know, before marriage rather. I'm gonna say, hey, listen, when I put that ring on your finger, it's gonna be for life. You know, I'm not going to even consider divorce no matter what problems we have. You know, that now that's more rhetoric than dialectic, but you know, there's no like if for all the troubles I had as a kid, if my mother had divorced my father, my troubles would have been worse and I would not be here today. Like it's the fact that families are no longer being destroyed by the thousands daily will do wonders for the cultural part of the boomers effect. Um, you know, so that's why in general, despite whatever pessimism I have for tomorrow, and when I pass by my end table with my pinky toe outstretched, and all those other things, I have a great hope for the future, and I fully believe it'll be a golden age to come, at least in my grandchildren's time. Um,
Yeah, we're not going to live to see the low point of of the current downward slide,
mm,
but God only allows evil that even greater good might come about. I
yeah,
mean, the crucifixion being the example par excellence, right?
right,
So, yeah, people who are more worthy are going to inherit the kingdom. Like I often hear people talk about how, well, China's taking over Hollywood. They're just flooding with Chinese money. Well, good, because China's going to be majority Christian by 2050, and they're already on track to become the
Right.
most like the biggest Christian country in the world. So
Yep.
good. Like we'll
Yes.
actually have like a reverse convergence effect, reverse death cult infiltration, where to get a movie made, you're gonna have to portray Christians positively, or no
Right.
Chinese money for you.
Uh.
Someone else pointed out.
Mm.
Sorry, really quick. I want to address something somebody in chat said. I think it was Bradford Walker, but yeah, Christians having big families. Well, yeah, well, Christianity is a proselytizing faith. We do heed the Lord Jesus' command to go make disciples of all nations. We do have missionaries. At the same time, the number one way that Christianity has spread throughout history is through procreation, through being passed on from one generation to the next.
Yep.
Which is why the boomers failing in that regard threw a huge monkey wrench into American culture. But China's relaxing of the one-child policy is why the growth of the church has just taken off there.
Yep. And it's like now they don't treat their kid like a spoiled brat. Now they'll actually have like, oh, I can have two kids. I have insurance against these things. You know, there's all kinds of cultural stuff that will just shift because they can have another kid.
Yeah, and once, if that does happen, when the dam will break is when
The dam will break.
someone, yeah,
Sorry.
is when someone is able to wrest back one of the big cultural institutions like Hollywood, or like publishing, or like the record industry, and actually impose some sanity and get rid of the moral turpitude there. Because here is what I boldly put to our listeners: if you made me the head writer of like the three biggest late night talk shows, like Jimmy Kimmel, John Oliver, Stephen Colbert, like all three of them, like if I had final editorial oversight and like unchallenged final approval and ability to just write the script for all those shows, write the opening monologue, I could turn 80% of the country Christian in 2 weeks.
Oh, and
In
I
2
believe
weeks.
you. I believe you. I
That's where they
absolutely.
get their programming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The what we can like the Bible has many verses about what you consume, you know, affects your heart, affects your life, you know, affects how you see the world. If if excuse me, if all you're consuming is, you know, Drew Carey going, "Hey guys, you know the biggest joke of all is people believing in God." Well, you're not going to fall into that stuff. You know, you're not going to go to church. You'll think it's ridiculous. You think that only morons would believe in this stuff because some thin soy boy smirked into a camera over a laugh track. Um, it really is a product of the art that the boomers consumed that are still being consumed now. If you know the biggest,
Yeah.
how do I want to say this, like when the artists, like we already have a big nexus of Christians in our group, everything from pulps to more fanciful science fiction and horror like myself, to the real robot genres, to you know all of the God's work that Jeffro is doing with D&D,
Here, here.
which has been an absolute trip. Um, if you're following it on Twitter, is what I'm referencing. And
Here we have JD Cowan and Bradford Walker, among others, in chat
oh yeah,
doing their part.
doing amazing stuff. Still writing their blog posts even after you know bannings and stuff like that. You know we're not big enough so that they will reach down with the thumb to squish us. But I firmly believe that the amount of stuff that we do and the work we do, you know, really does make a difference. And really doesn't, you know, even if nobody's come to me and said, "Oh, Ben, I read this book," and I became a Christian because of it. If a Christian cannot read one of my novels and be encouraged, one of my short stories, one of my whatever, and be encouraged that evil will be defeated and that good will triumph, I have done them a grave disservice. Um, you
Yeah.
know,
Well, I've got a black pill and I've got a white pill
ooh,
on that front. Okay. So, okay, in terms of our reach, like the Pulp Rev and the Superversive and Castalia House and Jeffro, we need to, if we don't engage with reality, we're never gonna make any headway. That's
yep,
the big mistake conservatives made, is like living in this self-made delusion comfort bubble and thinking well, we just gotta wait for Lefty to push too far, and then the moral
uh,
majority, the sleeping giant of the moral majority, is gonna wake up and rise up. No, there's no moral majority. If there was,
mm,
like that's a Nixon talking point, guys.
yep,
We're outnumbered. We
yep,
are vastly outnumbered. Like good 80% of the country out there are just NPCs getting their firmware upgrades and getting their software updates from Death Cult run media. I mean, whatever they might say. Again, they might be claiming to be Christian, like a lot of those boomers. But then again, I know a lot of Christian boomers who will say they're Catholic, for example, but then like vote for Biden, right?
right,
So yeah, there's Christian, then there's Christian. Like the number of people actually live it, and then the number of people who actually agree with spicier dissident takes is probably not even, like, generously, it's not even 10%, right? So
mm,
we are whistling in a hurricane
yep,
just by the sheer power they have to just cancel us. They don't even need to cancel us. Just their megaphone is so much bigger because they spent 100 years wresting it away from the original stock, right?
yep,
It's a mouse fighting a gorilla. So the idea that one of us is like gonna start a series, it's gonna become as big as Harry Potter, or found the next biggest publisher, or like release a role playing game that's gonna make an end run around the red-haired twinks at Wizards of the Coast and become the next big thing. No, that's
we'll take
almost
their
certainly not going to
programs
happen. That's
off.
like playing the lottery.
Yes,
They just won't let it. But the white pill is, our job is to keep that torch lit.
yes,
Just preserve. We're like the monks in these scriptoriums, preserving what came before from Viking raids.
yep,
So that is our duty. And then, yeah, after the new glorious Chinese Christian emperor sets things, like invades Los Angeles and sets things to rights, then people can come back and discover it. But be like, know that you are indeed planting oak trees in whose shade you will never recline, right? You're
yep,
doing it for your grandkids at this point,
yep.
which is fine.
That's my perspective on it too. Um, the and I explore a lot of it, with Pinkerton's ghosts. My main character Jack, he's a ghost even beyond the clever wordplay of the title. He was born to be consumed by the fires of Molech. He was he has all these issues. There are things that want to kill him. His mother lays down her life for him, and a whole bunch of other things. And ultimately, the message isn't going to be Jack save the world. No, all Jack is going to do is he's going to kill one villain, and then he's going to found a family. And the implication is going to be very white pilled from there, because that's ultimately my philosophy on this. I've got all these different things. I've had to change my plans for the next few years of my life like 4 times in the last like 2 weeks. It doesn't matter what I end up doing. If I'm somehow stuck over in East Asia, if I'm somewhere deep in the Arkansas Ozark backwoods, sharpening a flint for the next round of the Boogaloo. Uh, you know, I do it not because it satisfies, my spiritual need for self glorification. I'm not doing it because I'm a boomer. I'm doing it because it is worth doing, and my children and my grandchildren will benefit from it. There's no point in keeping a library if your children don't inherit it. Like one of the great tragedies of sort of like my grandparents dying was that my grandmother, who suffered many mental illnesses, threw away the vast science fiction library of my grandfather. Many times I go to yard sales because yard sailing in St. Louis is a very big thing, and you may find even like 5 or 6 or double digits worth on an excellent Saturday afternoon, where I just rescue old books from people. Just like, oh yeah, you can literally see, from Grandpa to Mark, or stuff like that. Um, I found stuff like that in these books, given and meant to be given, because even though these grandparents, who must have been greatest or silent or perhaps even lost generation, knew that things need to be passed on to our children. As always, I'm gonna cut it off here. Just a little bit early, just so I can do a few things around the house. I've do you have any final words for us, Brian?
Well, again, thanks for having me. Thanks to everyone in chat who listened live, and everyone who listens to this after the fact. As Ben pointed out, you can pick up my brand new anthology comic frame, Exceed Classified Intel, which collects every extant Exceed short story to date. For folks who've been asking to have the background of my hit mech action series filled in, that's where you can go to find the answers to some of the lingering mysteries and get caught up for the release of the new book, which will be out this fall. And you can also pick up my #1 bestseller, Don't Give Money to People Who Hate You, which is self-explanatory, but it will give you step-by-step actionable instructions for reclaiming your dignity from the pop cult.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. As always, it's enlightening to have you on. And I hope that sometime in the future we will speak again, and certainly check out his blog at, you call it Kairos, which is honestly part of the inspiration for this show. And also, lastly, thank you for experimenting with me with a bit more of a serious, less conversationally focused format. I think it went quite well.
Well, excellent. Glad to help.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for joining us. We love you very much. Be sure to look out for one more guest episode, this one by my friend Jason, as a police officer who gets a little bit too deep into an old rotted mansion. And then after that, 2 weeks after that, will be the first episode of Pinkerton's Ghost, Season 2, where Jack descends into Tartarus after somebody he loves. Have a good night, everyone. Excellent.